The arrested president now faces an official detention warrant being sought over insurrection charges. He continues refusing to show up for questioning at the Corruption Investigation Office. The political trouble poses greater pressure on the nation's economy, according to the latest assessment by the Finance Ministry. Israeli attacks on Gaza have continued after the ceasefire deal, killing more Palestinians. Amid what looks to be a fragile situation, Israel has confirmed the deal with Hamas. It's January 17th, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We start with the latest on the investigation by the anti-corruption officials who have applied for an official detention warrant against President Yoon. For more, Arirang's Kim Bo-kyung joins us live from the Gwacheon government complex, where the anti-graft agency is located. Bo-kyung, so the CIO has now applied for that detention warrant. It's another unprecedented event for a sitting president.
That's right, Jung-min. The CIO requested the detention warrant against President Yoon just before 6 p.m., around 3 hours before the deadline, filing the request with the Seoul Western District Court. And this marks the first time in South Korea's history where a sitting president faces a formal arrest. If the detention warrant is issued, Yoon can be held for a total of 20 days, including the initial 48-hour detention period. The CIO will likely hold and question Yoon for 8 more days before transferring the case to the prosecution, which has the authority to indict a suspect. Both parties have already agreed to spend 10 days each questioning Yoon. And with the detention warrant requested, the court is going to conduct a review tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eyes are now on whether President Yoon will attend the review, and if he does so, it will be his first appearance outside after being detained. Meanwhile, Yoon shared a message from the detention center via his lawyer around half an hour after the CIO requested the warrant, saying he is doing well, although it's quite uncomfortable, and that he has been looking back on state affairs through speeches he made. And he expressed gratitude for those who have been out on the streets supporting him.
And this filing for a detention warrant comes after President Yoon again refused to appear for questioning today.
That's right, Jung-min. He was supposed to be here at 10 a.m. For questioning, but again refused to appear. And his refusal comes after failing to appear the previous day, too, citing his health conditions. One CIO official said that there has been no notification from Yoon's side over his non-attendance this time around. The CIO did not resummon Yoon as the 48-hour deadline to detain him was approaching, which is at around 9 p.m. Friday. Yoon not appearing is not a surprise, as his legal team had already expressed regret over the Seoul Central District Court's decision on Thursday to dismiss the request to challenge his detention. Yoon had filed a petition to the Seoul Central District Court seeking a review of the legality of his detention, arguing the detention warrant against him issued by the Seoul Western District Court was invalid and that the CIO lacked jurisdiction over insurrection. This, however, was only to be rejected, and Yoon's lawyers have said it is unfortunate how illegal and unlawful actions are tolerated and that they will not comply with the CIO's investigations.
Meanwhile, Pogyong, public rallies remained intense at a number of different locations.
That's right, Jungmin. Behind me were around 300 supporters of Yoon protesting against the CIO, and around 1,000 supporters of Yoon have also been rallying in front of this whole detention center where President Yoon is currently chanting things like "Release the President." Just 10 meters away from the pro-Yoon protests were also those in favor of Yoon's impeachment, having a banner criticizing the declaration of martial law. Pro-Yoon protests are taking place in front of the Seoul Western District Court as well, where the detention warrant was requested. That is all I have for now. Back to Jungmin.
That was our Kim Bo-kyung reporting live from the Corruption Investigation Office for high-ranking officials. The ruling and opposition parties are locking horns over the disputed bill to appoint a special counsel to investigate President Yoon's martial law declaration. This is raising questions about whether a last-minute agreement can be reached before midnight, the deadline set by the opposition. Our political correspondent Shin Ha-young is on the line with the latest. Ha-young, how are the talks unfolding?
Jungmin, the rival political parties have yet to reach a final agreement. An official from the National Assembly Speaker's office told reporters that agreements had been reached on some issues, but the talks are still ongoing due to major differences. And the official declined to elaborate on these. And floor leaders of the two parties sat down at the negotiating table Friday afternoon with the National Assembly Speaker presiding to discuss a bill to launch a special counsel investigation into President Yoon's short-lived imposition of martial law. And this comes after the ruling People Power Party proposed its own version of the bill, while the opposition pushed its already prepared bill. And on Friday morning, PPP floor leader Kwon Song-dong said there was no need for the bill since most key figures, including President Yoon, have already been arrested or indicted. And he explained that the party proposed its own version of the special counsel bill as it was compelled to choose the worst option over the worst one. Take a listen.
This special counsel is pointless and serves no purpose. I urge the DP to withdraw the special counsel bill.
Democratic Party floor leader Park Chan-dae said the bill was needed to hold people accountable for a serious crime against democracy and the constitutional order. The DP has set the deadline for negotiations of midnight on Friday. And if no agreement is reached, it plans to hold a vote on its prepared special prosecutor bill. Take a listen.
I urge the PPP not to betray the people and to engage in negotiations sincerely.
How are the bills from each side different?
Well, the primary focus of the opposition's bill proposed earlier this month is to uncover whether President Yoon unlawfully instigated an insurrection and violated the Constitution in the process. And the PPP's version, however, removes the allegations of insurrection and also that of the inducement of foreign aggression. And it aims to look into 5 specific allegations overall in comparison to the 11 presented by the opposition. And the PPP's bill also shortens the investigation period to a maximum of 110 days compared to the DP's 150. And as for the size of the investigation team, the PPP is pushing for a team of 58, while the DP is aiming for 155. And meanwhile, ahead of the talks, Assembly Speaker Won-sik urged both parties to complete the negotiations by Friday and do their best to pass the agreed bill.
If we can't reach an agreement easily, we'll do our best, even if it takes working until midnight.
While all eyes are on whether they can reach an agreement by the deadline, the DP is expected to pass its own bill if the talks fail. And that's all I have for now. Jungmin.
All right, thanks, Ha-young, for the updates. Korea's political instability appears to be casting a darker cloud of uncertainty over its economy. Lee Soo-jin explains.
South Korea is seeing greater downside risks to its economy as uncertainties grow both at home and abroad. The somber assessments from the latest Economic Green Book, a monthly economic assessment report released by the Finance Ministry on Friday.
The term concerns about increased downside risks was previously used, but has now been replaced with greater downside pressure. This change reflects the negative trends observed across industries during both October and November.
It presents a bleaker outlook compared to last month's report when the government omitted the phrase economic recovery for the first time in over a year, as January's report also includes concerns about employment, an area where the government had previously been largely optimistic. In December, South Korea saw its first year-on-year decrease in employment figures in more than 3 years, as a downturn in industrial activity has begun to spill over into the labor market. This was mainly attributed to a larger drop in employment in the manufacturing sector last month, which continued to see a decline for the 6th straight month, and the construction sector for 8 consecutive months. This comes as industrial output in November dropped 0.4% compared to the previous month, as the services and construction sectors remained weak, marking a fall for the 3rd straight month. Services output declined by 0.2%, driven by decreases in the finance and insurance sectors. The construction sector also experienced a drop in production for the 7th consecutive month as building activity slowed, setting a new record for the longest continuous downturn since 1997. But retail sales, an indicator of consumer spending, rebounded by 0.4% compared to the previous month after seeing declines in both September and October. The Finance Ministry official said the month's report also placed less emphasis on concerns about inflation, as figures for December showed that consumer prices rose 1.9% year-on-year, marking the 4th consecutive month of inflation under the 2% mark. But with continued political unrest in the country as well as mounting concerns about potential changes in the trade environment during President-elect Donald Trump's 2nd term, the government pledged to collaborate with relevant agencies and swiftly implement economic policy plans for 2025 to ensure economic stability. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Over in the U.S., with only a few days left until Donald Trump's inauguration next week, eyes are now on the message he will deliver and who will attend the event. Our foreign affairs correspondent Pei-Eun-ji has the details.
Security preparations are underway in Washington, D.C. as the city prepares for Trump's 2nd inauguration that will take place on January 20th. More than 48 kilometers of fencing are being set up, and officials are on high alert, especially since the president-elect survived 2 apparent assassination attempts during his campaign.
More than 30 miles of anti-scale fence will be used for the inauguration, more than any other NSSE ever before. The Secret Service is...
The inauguration day includes a formal swearing-in ceremony, a parade to the White House, and musical performances. Trump will take the presidential oath of office and deliver his inaugural address, which he earlier said will be about unity. The 78-year-old has repeatedly expressed confidence about promising a golden age for the country.
We're approaching the dawn of America's golden age. It's going to be a golden age for America.
Meanwhile, ahead of the inauguration day, Trump's transition team shared an official portrait of the president-elect. Pictured in a blue suit and a blue tie, Trump's stone-faced expression is remarkably similar to his historic mugshot taken in August 2023. His new image stands in contrast to those of former presidents, and it's much sterner than the photo he used during his first term 8 years ago, in which he wore a wide smile. The inauguration is expected to draw former presidents, lawmakers, tech CEOs, as well as senior officials and leaders from countries around the world. From South Korea, Seoul's ambassador to Washington, Cho Yeon-dong, will be attending the event as the country's representative. 7 lawmakers from the ruling Conservative Party and the main opposition Democratic Party will also travel to the U.S. to take part in the inauguration. China announced Friday that its Vice President Han Zheng will attend the event in Washington, D.C., instead of the country's President Xi Jinping, which will mark the first time for a senior Chinese official. This comes after Trump sent an unusual invitation to Xi, a break from tradition, since foreign heads of state do not typically attend U.S. presidential inaugurations. As for Japan, Foreign Minister Takeshi Iwaya is set to travel to Washington to participate in the event. In a press conference, the Japanese top diplomat said he would make final arrangements for a summit between the country's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba and Donald Trump during his 5-day trip to the U.S. 배은지, Arirang News.
In the Middle East, despite the sealing of a ceasefire deal that was supposed to start on Sunday local time, Israeli assaults against Hamas in Gaza continue to raise the Palestinian death toll. An Sung-jin has more.
Many rejoiced at the news of a 6-week ceasefire deal agreed between Israel and the Palestinian militant group Hamas. But just days before the deal is implemented on Sunday, Israel conducted more airstrikes in Gaza, killing at least 3 more Gazans and raising death toll to 86 since the news of the ceasefire agreement. According to Gaza's Civil Defense Service, the death toll includes 23 children and 27 women. During the same period, more than 250 Palestinians have been injured in the airstrikes. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu convened a security cabinet meeting on Friday to discuss and ratify the ceasefire, which was successfully agreed on. According to local media, in a statement from Netanyahu's office, the Prime Minister has been informed of the release of hostages and has signed the deal. This comes after the vote was initially postponed, with Netanyahu blaming a last-minute disagreement with Hamas for the delay. A full cabinet meeting to give final approval to the ceasefire deal is expected to take place on Saturday. And considering the legal procedures, the first hostages could be released as early as the 20th. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the deal will start on time despite what he called a last-minute loose end.
On the ceasefire, yes, I am confident, and I fully expect that implementation will begin, as we said, on Sunday. Look, it's not exactly surprising that in a process and a negotiation that has been this challenging and this fraught, you may get a loose end. We're tying up that loose end as we speak.
Following the ceasefire agreement, the European Union on Thursday pledged 120 million euros, or over 123 million US dollars, in aid for Palestine. According to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in a post on X, the ceasefire and hostage release agreement offers hope the region desperately needed, but added that Gaza's humanitarian situation remains grim. The aid will provide assistance to address acute food insecurity and malnutrition, healthcare assistance, water, sanitation and hygiene support, shelter and protection assistance. The latest humanitarian assistance to Gaza from the bloc brings the total value to over 460 million US dollars since 2023. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Time now for our weekly arts and culture segment. We have our culture correspondent, Song Yujin in the studio. Welcome, Yujin.
Great to be here, Jungmin.
What do you have for us today?
Well, Jungmin, as you'll already know, I'm sure, this year, 2025, marks the 80th anniversary of Korea's liberation from Japan's colonial rule. So to really honor this historic milestone, a variety of stage and screen productions are currently introducing Korea's independence movement to the audiences. So for this week, here are 2 productions that introduce Korean freedom fighters, both on stage and on screen.
요리모 다카이 우리 이 말을 거부한다.
4 young men and women sing with passion, even with guns pressed into their backs. Their mission, to protect the Korean language from being erased during Japan's colonial rule. This homegrown musical, Yesterday's Poem, Tomorrow's Song, brings to life the struggles of young Korean independence fighters to defend their language and culture through poetry when forced to adopt Japanese. This is the first musical to use the poetry of Kim So-wol as its lyrics. Kim, one of Korea's most beloved poets, lived during the Japanese colonial period from 1910 to 1945.
Korea's independence movement was also about the power of words, poetry, and speech. We wanted to highlight not only the lyrical beauty of Kim So-eul's poetry, but also the deep emotions tied to our history and identity.
There are countless films, dramas, and performances about the independence movement. But our musical focuses on cultural efforts, young people who believed in fighting through creativity and expression.
Alongside the musical, other creative projects are honoring the sacrifices and resilience of independence activists, as this year marks the 80th anniversary of Korea's liberation from Japan. The film Baeksan, From Arirang to Palhae, is another example. The documentary tells a story of independence activist An Hee-jae, who ran a trading company that served as the financial backbone of the Korean provisional government in Shanghai.
An believed in nurturing people and fostering education to build a better future. He understood that independence required not just weapons, but also resources, networks, and platforms to sustain the movement. His trading company, similar to today's largest conglomerates, also helped train independence fighters.
Using advanced AI technology, director Jin vividly brought An's story to life on screen. Drone footage of Palhae Farm, a rice farm An founded to support displaced Korean farmers and fund the independence movement, shows his vision, a haven where independence grew through empowerment.
While armed resistance played a significant role in the independence movement, we must also recognize there were many figures like An, who worked behind the scenes to provide the critical resources that made such efforts possible.
These stories remind us that freedom was won through countless acts of courage in many forms.
I think these productions really show that the pen can be as mighty or sometimes mightier than the sword. Eugene, you mentioned earlier that there are several productions here in Korea focusing on the independence movement. What are other notable works?
Well, I would like to mention the film Harbin, starring star Korean actor Hyun Bin. And since its release last Christmas Eve, the film has been topping the domestic box office for 24 consecutive days. And so far, it has sold more than 4 million tickets here in Korea. So to tell you a bit more about the film, it's a historical drama that tells the story of independence activist An Jung-gun, played by Hyun Bin. And it focuses on his mission to assassinate Ito Hirobumi, Japan's first prime minister and then resident general of Korea, at Harbin Station in China. And there's also some good news for our international viewers because the film is already being screened in theaters across the US, Indonesia, and Malaysia, and is set to premiere in Australia, New Zealand, and Taiwan later this month.
And what are events that we can look forward to this year celebrating the 80th anniversary of Korea's liberation from Japan?
Well, as it's still early in the year, not many have been announced yet, but at least the Culture Ministry announced that this year, museums under its wing will hold several exhibitions to mark the occasion. And also, as this year marks 60 years of normalization of diplomatic ties between South Korea and Japan, I think it will be interesting to see what kind of events will be held as the year unfolds.
I'm sure you're going to keep us updated throughout the year, Eugene. Thank you for the report.
My pleasure.
The air was freezing this morning again across the country. However, the temperatures rose up to 5 degrees Celsius during the daytime in Seoul, which is the typical winter level. With only clouds passing in the skies this weekend, milder weather than usual will continue. Meanwhile, the East Coast has been under a dry weather advisory for weeks. As well as a dry condition, strong wind is also blowing. It is important to be extra cautious due to the increased risk of wildfires. Tomorrow morning, Seoul will start off at -4 degrees, Gwangju at -3 degrees. Daily highs will move up to around 10 degrees in most areas, with Daegu, Busan, and Jeju at 10 degrees. There won't be much cold next week, but snow is forecast in the central parts of the country on Monday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
How to survive in Korea. One room. So, you're surviving in Korea if you've signed a contract for a one room. Obviously, you're a pro. But the real deal begins now. Step 1. Housewarming. No need to buy toilet paper, diffusers or hand soap. You'll get them soon enough as housewarming gifts. And some are bound to pile up. There's nothing better to serve your guests than mightier nabe. If you have Korean friends coming over, don't forget the extra garlic. Step 2. Garbage disposal. With great power comes great responsibility. You've had a good time, so let's get to work. It might be tempting to sweep everything into a trash can, but you have to separate your garbage. Not bothered? Beware that negligence is punished with a fine or public humiliation. Step 3. Drying rack. You're excited to live alone in Korea, but the fate of these items, hanger, storage, or a hanger. Go get fresh coffee outside. Jogging doesn't cost anything, and nothing beats instant rice. But keep one item around so that you don't get too lonely. Step 4. Pros of living alone. No mum. Cons of living alone. No mum. A new towel doesn't magically appear. You have to do the laundry regularly. If anyone gives a towel as a souvenir, take it. Get rid of mold immediately. Don't be lazy with the vacuum cleaner. Housework is an endless affair. Overwhelmed? Give your mum a call and thank her for everything she's done. Did you survive in your one room? Wait, you have an unwanted visitor. Call someone you fancy. Could be the right person for the job.
열정을 쏟을 곳이 필요했던 사람들, 그런 사람들의 이야기가 담겨지게 됐던 것 같습니다.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring you today's most pressing issues from across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-kyeon. South Korean President Yoon became the first sitting Korean president to ever be served with an arrest warrant. Just hours before, the CIO sought a warrant to formally arrest Yoon, hours before its initial 48-hour detainment deadline expires tonight. After being temporarily detained Tuesday, Yoon faced an intense grilling at the Corruption Investigation Office for high-ranking officials. But for the next 2 days, he refused to take part in any questioning over insurrection charges. The president's legal team filed a petition to the Seoul Central District Court to review the legality of his detention, but the court dismissed the challenge Thursday night, keeping him in custody. So what's next for President Yoon? And will the court give the green light for Yoon to be arrested? For more on this, we invite Cho Hee-kyung, professor of law at Hongik University. Welcome, Professor.
Hello, thanks for having me.
And also joining us is Jung W. Hwang, Chief Executive Officer at LawQuant LLC. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me as well.
So for the sake of our viewers who may not be following the current situation in Korea, let's circle back to Tuesday's temporary detention. So Yoon's arrest early Tuesday was broadcast live through major media outlets across the globe. Mr. Hwang, how did you see this? And could you remind us of the requirements for a temporary detention arrest?
Yeah, first of all, the temporary detention arrest is a very rare phenomenon. That's because usually you go for a permanent arrest warrant, not a temporary arrest warrant. What happens is that when the suspect is extremely uncooperative with the investigating body, that they'll actually try to bring him in, and you have the prosecutors have up to 48 hours to ask for the permanent arrest warrant. Now, what happened on Tuesday was quite remarkable. What we saw was the Presidential Security Service stand down. Most of the workers, most of the bodyguards within the service basically said, no, we are not doing this. I mean, we defended President Yoon the first time around, but we thought better. We've been reviewing the legal issues, and it is not legal what we are doing. So we saw basically the bodyguards within the Presidential Security Service give up, and President Yoon having to just kind of, basically give up himself, even though he clearly didn't want to be brought in.
Mm-hmm. But on his first day, President Yoon exercised his right to remain silent, providing no answers, and reportedly declined to participate in questioning on Wednesday and Thursday. How should this situation be interpreted, Mr. Hwang? Mm-hmm.
I think, in general, just as a strategy, when you're facing a criminal charge, whether in any country actually, it's never really in your interest, especially if you have something to hide, to actually talk to the prosecutors. Basically, right to remain silent is guaranteed both in the Korean constitution and constitutions around, many countries around the world. So it is not really surprising to me that President Yoon is exercising his right to remain silent. At the same time, it is kind of striking that although his public statements seem to suggest that he's going to be very upfront and very verbal about why he declared martial law, what he has done now is actually kind of playing, trying to take advantage of various legal technicalities. And I think that might actually look a little disappointing to many of his supporters.
Yes, it could be. Now to Professor Cho, Yoon's lawyers filed for a review of the legality of the warrant on Wednesday, which the court has turned down. For starters, could you tell us, what is this petition or review? I hear it's not a very common request.
Not at all a common request. In fact, I understand that last year there were only 4 of such requests to review a temporary arrest warrant was made. It's rare because, first of all, temporary arrest warrants themselves are not that often issued. And secondly, excuse me, it's actually not to the advantage of the suspect to challenge the validity of the temporary arrest warrant, because a temporary arrest warrant is usually valid only for 48 hours. And if you challenge it, then you are held under temporary arrest for that much longer, for as long as it takes to review the temporary warrant, your temporary arrest period is suspended and it resumes again. So, for example, the temporary arrest would have actually expired had Yoon's team not made the challenge to the validity by 10:33 a.m. this morning. But because they did make the challenge, which was rejected, he's still held under this temporary arrest warrant.
Right.
So, yeah.
But to make sure, during the time that it was extended, he wasn't going under questioning, right?
No, I mean, he refused to be questioned in any case. He refused to actually present himself to the CIO.
All right.
And yes.
Now, the court has decided to dismiss the challenge, the latest petition. And Mr. Hwang, what was the reason behind the court's dismissal of this petition, and what could this mean? Do you think Yoon's side would have expected such a result?
Well, they should have. I mean, the temporary arrest warrants were issued twice, but the first time around, CIO failed to really execute a warrant because the Presidential Security Service resisted really hard the first time around. And both times, actually, the President Yoon's legal team challenged the jurisdiction of CIO as well as legality of the warrant. So, and you know, the Western District Court have dismissed all those arguments. So now they turn to the Central District Court, trying to sort of, get another bite at the apple. But the circumstances didn't really change. So it really didn't give any ground for Central District Court to actually say, hey, we're going to disagree with Western District Court. I mean, as far as the laws are concerned, as circumstances are concerned, everything stayed the same. So as predictably, the request was denied.
And just today, the CIO has sought an arrest warrant for Yoon just hours ago. Mr. Hwang, can you remind us of the legal requirements for filing an arrest warrant in Korea, and how is it different from the current temporary warrant imposed on Yoon?
Right. The temporary warrant was requested because President Yoon refused to cooperate with the investigation. The permanent arrest warrant version is usually to make sure that evidence is preserved and to reduce the flight risk of the suspect. Now, the fact that President Yoon was hauled up in the presidential residence is sort of like an escape in itself. So I think the CIO will be pretty successful in requesting the permanent arrest warrant. I mean, so far, there have been various challenges the President Yoon's legal team has made to the courts for various issues. They've lost them all. So I don't expect their winning to start anytime soon.
What about Professor Cho? The ball is now handed over to the Seoul Western District Court. How do you forecast the arrest plans to proceed? We hear if the court gives the green light, he will be detained for questioning for about 20 days?
That's exactly right. So since they issued the request for the full arrest warrant this evening, I believe that the court will actually hold a hearing and look at whether to issue the full arrest warrant tomorrow. Although it's weekend, there is a judge on duty whose task is to look at these kind of warrants, and so they'll be looking at that. And as Mr. Hwang said, I believe that the court will issue it because Yoon has been completely uncooperative with investigation authorities so far, and it doesn't seem like he's changing while he's in custody. And certainly there doesn't seem to be a flight risk given that he is still the president. However, there is very real risk of destruction of evidence, and also a high likelihood that charges against him will be proven. So I believe that the court will issue the warrant.
So what's the key in for the court's decision? What are the key issues for the court to review of the arrest warrant, Professor Cho? So
the court only really looks at three things. First is whether the crime will be proven against the suspect. So in Yoon's case, whether these insurrection charges will be proven against him. And, we've witnessed what happened on the 3rd of December, all of us with our own very eyes. Some of us were there on the scene at the National Assembly. And we know what happened. We saw the soldiers. We saw the the soldiers breaking into the National Assembly building, trying to stop the vote to withdraw the martial law declaration, etc., and also all the other information and facts that have come out ever since then. And so there is very strong likelihood that the charges against Yoon are likely to be proven. Whether he will also be charged with military treason is another issue. We don't know that yet, but the court doesn't really need to consider that yet. The other two factors are the flight risk. Once again, given that he is still the president, he hasn't been impeached yet, we can argue that there is low risk of him taking flight, but there is very strong and real risk of destruction of evidence on Yoon's part. So and given his uncooperative attitude with regard to the investigation so far, the court will most likely issue the warrant. Yoon is really not doing any service work to himself, because if he had cooperated and simply presented himself for questioning by the CIO in the first place and not resisted and not, basically argued the whole time that it's illegal and invalid, etc., then he could have simply attended these questioning and even attended the trial while staying and remaining at the presidential residence. But obviously it's also part of his strategy and part of the show that he is resisting this with all his might, because he believes that this is all illegal, and it's probably also a boon and a burn for his supporters as well.
Right, so he definitely has something on his mind about this legal tactics. But the CIO is known to have filed for the warrant to formally arrest Yoon with the Seoul Western District Court, which is the same court that is filed for a temporary warrant for 48 hours. Meanwhile, President Yoon's legal team has maintained that such a process should be conducted through the Seoul Central District Court. Professor Cho, it's very confusing. Could you clarify for our viewers the reasons behind the two parties' preference for different courts, the Western Court and the Central Court? Is there any specific legal framework or rule that governs the choice of court in such matters?
Sure. It's really a question of jurisdiction of the courts. The basic rule is in criminal matters, the warrants are usually, the jurisdiction is actually with the court where the suspect is present or the crime has taken place. And in this case, because the president's residence is in Hannam-dong, which is within the jurisdiction of the Western District Court, that's why CIO, I believe, filed for the warrant with the Western District Court. Now, the Yoon's team's argument is because the CIO's location is actually within the jurisdiction of the Central District Court, they should have filed for the warrant with the Central District Court. But that really doesn't matter. And I believe that even if CIO had filed a warrant with the Central District Court, the Yoon's team would have then argued, well, no, you should have filed it with the Western District Court because Yoon's registered residence is within the jurisdiction of the Western District Court. So, I think it's clearly just another delaying tactic and obstruction tactic, and again, another strategy to basically incite and as a show for his supporters to let them know that the president believes this is all illegal and he's doing everything that he can to fight against this illegal execution of arrest warrants, etc., etc. So the rules are quite clear, and they've made this challenge numerous times, and every single time the court has rejected Yoon's team's argument and said that the temporary arrest warrants and other orders that have been made are completely valid and completely legal, and so there's really no argument here.
Right, so legally it doesn't really matter on which court they have filed this arrest warrants, right?
Well, initially it didn't matter, but technically I believe if the CIO now actually files with the Central District Court, then Yoon's team will certainly come back and say, you see, you also acknowledged that filing with the Western District Court was illegal, and so the original temporary arrest warrant was actually illegal. So this entire execution of warrant was illegal, and you'd better do this all over again because this is all illegal. I think that's the kind of strategy that they will be taking.
Okay, now let's turn into the impeachment trial. Thursday was the second formal hearing of the trial, and the Constitutional Court has rejected Yoon's request for a postponement. The trial has proceeded without Yoon's presence, and the court further designated some dates for future hearings too. Mr. Hwang, could you walk us through the developments at the trial?
I guess sort of one thing to keep in mind is that the overall legal strategy, or if there is one, of President Yoon's legal team, both in the impeachment trial as well as the criminal proceeding, is just to delay whatever methods that you use. I think Professor Cho kind of pointed out that, the President Yoon's legal team would have offered whatever legal arguments to just delay things, and I think that was really on the show on the second hearing that took place. Basically, some of the arguments that the President Yoon's lawyers are making really made a lot of people just wonder if the lawyers are truly serious about defending President Yoon. For example, one lawyer that just joined President Yoon's team basically said that Constitutional Court doesn't have the authority, doesn't have the information, doesn't have the competence to actually review President Yoon's decision to declare martial law. Now, when you're before the Constitutional Court, this is sounding very insulting, and it is probably not a very good idea to insult the Constitutional Court itself, but that's what President Yoon's lawyer did. So it is a little strange that they will actually take that kind of argument and actually present it as an oral argument. But I think what we are seeing is that they're just throwing everything they've got, no matter how outlandish that these arguments may sound, in order to just buy time for the time being.
Right, but the court has designated upcoming hearing dates already. It seems like they are willing to, push through and proceed with the hearings. How long do you think it would take to, come up with a conclusion, Professor Cho?
Yes, you're certainly right. The court is trying their best to ensure that the defendant, in this case Yoon, gets a proper opportunity to defend himself through his lawyers. But the lawyers are really not doing him any good. I mean, to me, they're doing him serious disservice because they're throwing just nonsensical arguments. And I listened to some of the arguments that were actually being made by the Yoon's defense team yesterday, and response by the courts. And I could see that the court was really trying to be very patient and trying to ensure that they did get the opportunity and sufficient time to make their arguments. But once they really, crossed the line and just started being completely nonsensical, they really sort of put a stop to it. And so they were almost like, a kindergarten teacher kind of dealing with unruly child. It was almost like this. So at yesterday's hearing, they set 3 more hearing dates, February 6th, 11th, and 13th. So the pace is about 2 hearings per week. And I think the court's expectation is that most of the substantive hearings will be over by that date. But I suspect that what will happen once February 16th or 13th comes around, Yoon's team might then argue that they would like to call additional witnesses and try to buy more time that way. But if we hark back to Park Geun-hye's impeachment trial, Park Geun-hye's defense team also tried the tactic of trying to call as many witnesses as they could. I think they submitted up to 50 witnesses list to the court, and the court accepted some, but they didn't accept all. And so I suspect that the court will also be taking similar line with Yoon's defense team, but their final card might be Yoon would like to give testimony himself and be present in the court directly, and then claim that he's ill or something on the last day and not turn up. But I think the court will come to a conclusion end of February, early March at the latest. That's the expected timeline.
All right. Thank you for giving us a time frame despite the uncertain situation. Professor Cho and Mr. Hwang, thank you so much for your insights tonight. I'm afraid we'll have to wrap up our discussion here. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.